I was standing in their kitchen, the one I'd cleaned 1,000 times, when my daughter-in-law looked up from her phone and said the words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my place in their lives. "You're just the free babysitter, Mom. We don't need you anymore." The room went cold despite the summer heat still lingering outside. My son David sat at the table, and when I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, he only nodded slowly and said maybe it was time I stepped back, that they were adults now. The grandchildren, Sophie and Max, stopped coloring and stared up at me with confusion in their wide eyes. And I felt something inside me crack like old china, beautiful once but fragile now, finally breaking after years of invisible stress lines spreading beneath the surface. My name is Evelyn Marie Hayes. I'm 83 years old. Though some days I feel ancient and other days I still feel like that young mother of 30 who buried her husband and decided she'd be strong enough for 2 parents. I raised David by myself in a little house on Maple Street, the same house I still live in today. I worked double shifts as a nurse, came home exhausted to help with homework, attended every baseball game even when my feet ached so badly I could barely stand. I sacrificed things I can't even name anymore because they became so much a part of who I was that I forgot there was ever another version of me. One who might have traveled or pursued hobbies or dated again, or simply rested. When David married Lisa 12 years ago, I was overjoyed. She seemed like a lovely young woman, ambitious, bright, full of energy. They had Sophie first, and then Max 2 years later. I remember holding each of them in the hospital, these tiny perfect beings, and feeling like my life had come full circle. I'd raised my son well enough that he was now creating his own family, and I would get to be part of it. I would get to be the grandmother I'd always imagined being, the one who baked cookies and told stories and made childhood magical. And I was that grandmother, for a very long time. It started small, the way these things always do. Lisa went back to work when Sophie was just 3 months old. She was building her career in marketing, and David traveled frequently for his sales job. They asked if I could watch Sophie a few days a week. Of course I said. Of course I could. What else would I do? I was retired, my time was my own. And this was my granddaughter. This was family. Those few days became most days. When Max was born, it became every day. I had my routine down perfectly. I'd arrive at their house at 7 in the morning, before they left for work. I'd feed the children breakfast, get Sophie ready for preschool and then kindergarten, play with Max, read him stories, put him down for his nap. I'd pick Sophie up from school, help with homework, make them dinner, give them baths, sing lullabies until their eyes grew heavy. They called me Mama Eve. That's what melted my heart every single time. Not Grandma, not Nana, Mama Eve. Like I was a second mother, which in many ways I suppose I was. I knew Sophie liked her sandwiches cut diagonally, not straight across. I knew Max was afraid of the dark but too proud to admit it, so I always left the hallway light on and his door cracked open just so. I knew their favorite bedtime stories by heart. I knew which teacher Sophie struggled with, and which friend Max played with at recess. I knew everything because I was there for everything. David and Lisa would come home around 6 or 7, sometimes later. They'd walk in tired, grateful, kissing the children and thanking me briefly before I gathered my things and drove myself home. Sometimes Lisa would already be on her phone, dealing with work emails. Sometimes David would grab a beer and collapse on the couch. They were busy, I understood that. Young parents with demanding careers, trying to build their future. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. What would I ask for? They were giving me purpose. They were giving me a reason to wake up each morning. Without them, what was I? Just an old woman alone in an empty house, watching the years slip away. The requests started expanding. Could I watch them on Saturday so they could have date night? Of course. Could I take them for the weekend so they could go to a wedding out of state? Absolutely. Could I cover the week of spring break because daycare was closed? I wouldn't dream of saying no. I canceled my own plans sometimes. A lunch with my friend Margaret, a trip to visit my sister in Florida. But family came first. Family always came first. That's what I'd believed my entire life, what I'd built my entire identity around. I never asked for money. They offered once early on, and I'd waved it away like the suggestion was insulting. These were my grandchildren. You don't charge family for love. Besides, I had my pension, my small savings. I didn't need much. What I needed was to feel useful, to feel wanted, to feel like my existence still mattered in a world that often treats elderly women like we're already ghosts, already gone, just taking up space until we actually disappear. Looking back now, I can see the signs I missed or chose to ignore. The way Lisa stopped saying thank you after a while, like my presence was expected rather than appreciated. The way David stopped asking if I was available and just assumed I would be. The way they'd make plans, vacations, parties, evenings out, without ever considering that I might have plans of my own. I'd become part of the furniture in their lives, as essential and as unnoticed as the refrigerator or the washing machine. You don't think about those things until they break, do you? You just expect them to work. There were moments when I felt a flutter of something in my chest, something that might have been resentment or hurt, but I pushed it down. I told myself I was being selfish. I told myself I should be grateful I was healthy enough to help, that I had grandchildren at all when some of my friends had children who'd moved across the country, or who barely visited. I told myself a lot of things to make the uncomfortable feelings go away. But then came that evening 3 months ago, the one I started this story with, the one that changed everything. I'd been feeling more tired than usual. My back ached from lifting Max, who at 5 was getting too big to carry but still wanted to be held like a baby sometimes. My knees protested every time I got down on the floor to play. I'd had a mild cold that wouldn't quite go away, probably because I never gave myself time to properly rest. That particular evening, I'd made the children spaghetti, Sophie's favorite, and cleaned up the kitchen while they watched a cartoon. David and Lisa came home together, which was rare. They seemed to be in good moods, laughing about something from work. I gathered my sweater and purse, and then I said it. I said the thing I'd been thinking about for weeks but had been too afraid to voice. I mentioned very gently, very carefully, that I was feeling a bit worn out lately and wondered if maybe I could take a little break soon. Not stop helping altogether, I assured them quickly. Just maybe a few weeks to rest, to recover, to catch my breath. Perhaps they could look into a part-time sitter or daycare, just temporarily. The silence that followed felt like falling. Lisa's face changed. Her eyes went hard in a way I'd never seen before, at least not directed at me. She set down her phone and stood up. And when she spoke, her voice was sharp and cold. "You're just a free babysitter, Mom. We don't need you anymore. We can figure it out." The words hit me like a physical blow. Free babysitter. Not beloved grandmother. Not family member. Not Mama Eve. Just free labor that had finally asked for something, and thereby revealed itself as a burden rather than a blessing. I looked at David, my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. He wouldn't meet my eyes at first. Then he glanced up and nodded, adding that they were adults now, that maybe it really was time for me to step back and let them handle their own family. Their own family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if the thousands of hours I'd poured into those children counted for nothing more than a service provided, a transaction completed. Sophie asked why I looked sad. Max reached for my hand. I kissed both their heads, breathing in the smell of their shampoo. The brand I always bought because it didn't irritate Max's sensitive skin. Then I stood up, slowly because my knees hurt and my heart hurt worse. I said okay. I said I understood. My voice sounded steady somehow, even though everything inside me was shaking. I walked to the door, picked up my purse and left. Nobody hugged me goodbye. Nobody followed me out. Nobody said wait, we didn't mean it, we're sorry. I drove home through streets I'd driven 10,000 times. Past the park where I'd pushed both children on the swings. Past the ice cream shop where I'd bought them cones every Friday in summer. Past the library where we'd gotten books every Tuesday. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine and sat there in the dark. Then I went inside my empty house and cried harder than I'd cried since the day they buried my husband 42 years ago. But somewhere between the tears and the dawn, something shifted inside me. Something that had been bending and bending for years finally snapped, and instead of breaking me, it set me free. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room chair, the one by the window that looks out onto the street, and watched the darkness slowly give way to gray morning light. My phone sat on the side table, silent. Part of me kept expecting it to ring, Kept expecting David to call and say they'd been stressed. They hadn't meant those words. Would I please come back? But the phone never rang. The silence felt heavy, like something physical pressing down on my chest. When the sun finally rose, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table. This was the table where I'd helped David with his algebra homework when he was 14, where I'd addressed Christmas cards every year, where I'd eaten thousands of meals alone. I looked around my house and really saw it for the first time in years. When had everything become so centered around them, around my role as Mama Eve? The refrigerator held the ingredients I kept on hand for the children's favorite meals. The coat closet contained extra jackets in their sizes for unexpected cold days. The spare bedroom had slowly filled with toys and books and puzzles I'd collected for when they visited, though those visits had become rarer as I spent all my time at their house instead. I'd built my entire life around being needed by them, and now they'd made it clear I wasn't needed at all. I was just convenient, free, replaceable. The first day was the hardest. My body didn't know what to do with itself. For years, my alarm had gone off at 6 in the morning. I'd shower, dress, eat a quick breakfast, and drive to their house. My muscles had memorized the routine so completely that I woke up at 6 that first morning anyway, my mind already planning what I'd make the children for breakfast before I remembered. Before the weight of those words crashed over me again. Free babysitter. I stayed in bed until 8, then 9, then finally dragged myself up at 10 feeling more exhausted than if I'd never slept at all. I tried to fill the day with normal things. I did laundry, though there wasn't much of it. I cleaned my house, though it was already clean. I turned on the television but couldn't focus on anything. Every hour that passed, I thought about what I would normally be doing. At noon, I would be making Max his lunch, cutting his sandwich into triangles the way he liked. At 3, I would be picking Sophie up from school, listening to her chatter about her day. At 6, I would be reading them stories before their parents came home. The absence of these rituals felt like missing limbs, phantom pain from something that had been cut away. My phone remained silent all day. Not a single call. Not a single text asking where I was or if I was okay. The silence answered questions I hadn't wanted to ask. They really didn't need me. They'd meant what they said. I was just the free help, and when the help asked for a break, the help became disposable. That night, I made dinner for one. A small chicken breast, some vegetables. I set one place at the table. I ate slowly, tasting nothing. After I washed my single plate and put it away, I sat in my chair again and cried some more. But these tears felt different somehow. Mixed with the grief was something else, something I was almost afraid to name. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a cold, steady awareness of injustice. I had given them everything. I had asked for one small thing, and they had shown me exactly how little I meant to them. The second day, my phone finally rang. It was Lisa. My hand trembled as I reached for it. And then I stopped. I sat there and watched it ring. Watched her name flash on the screen. Watched it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, she called again. Again, I didn't answer. The third call came from David. I stared at his name, my son's name, and felt my heart crack a little more. But I didn't answer that one either. They left voicemails. I listened to them later, after my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the phone steady. Lisa's voice was irritated, impatient. She needed me to pick up the kids today. Something had come up at work. Why wasn't I answering? David's message was similar. Mom, where are you? We need you today. Call us back. Not we're sorry. Not we were wrong. Just we need you. As if I existed only to fulfill their needs. As if I had no right to my own hurt or my own decisions. I deleted the messages. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I blocked their numbers. Not forever, I told myself. Just for now. Just until I could breathe again without feeling like I was drowning. The days began to blur together. I stopped counting them. My phone stayed silent now that I'd blocked them. And the silence was both painful and peaceful. I started sleeping later. Waking when my body wanted to instead of when the alarm demanded. I made myself proper breakfasts, pancakes, eggs, fruit, and ate them slowly while reading the newspaper. I'd forgotten how much I used to enjoy the morning paper. Before my mornings became entirely about getting children fed and dressed and ready. I started taking walks. Just short ones at first, around my neighborhood. Then longer ones, to the park I'd taken the children to so many times. It looked different when I went alone, quieter and somehow more beautiful. I sat on a bench and watched other grandmothers with their grandchildren. And I felt a complicated mix of envy and relief. I found myself wondering if they were appreciated or if they were just a free help too, counting down until they were no longer convenient. One morning about a week after I'd left their house, I ran into my old friend Margaret at the grocery store. We'd known each other for 40 years, but I'd barely seen her in the past 5 because I was always too busy with the grandchildren. Her face lit up when she saw me, and we stood in the produce section talking for nearly an hour. She told me about her book club, about the volunteer work she did at the senior center, about the watercolor class she'd started taking. Her life sounded full and rich and entirely her own. When I told her, very briefly, what had happened, she squeezed my hand and said something I'll never forget. She said that sometimes the people we love the most take the most from us because we let them, because we don't know how to value ourselves enough to say no. That conversation planted a seed. Margaret invited me to her book club the following week, and I said yes. I hadn't read a book for pleasure in years. I'd been too tired at night, too busy during the day. But now I had time. Now I had nothing but time, and I could choose what to fill it with. The book club met in the basement of the library on Thursday evenings. There were 8 women, all around my age, all sharp and funny and alive in ways I'd forgotten women our age could be. We discussed the book, a mystery novel I'd actually enjoyed, and then we talked about our lives, our families, our frustrations and joys. When it was my turn to share, I told them a simplified version of what had happened. I expected judgment or pity, but instead I got understanding. 3 of the women had similar stories. One had been caring for her grandchildren full-time until her daughter moved across the country without warning, taking the children and barely staying in touch. Another had stopped helping after her son's wife made a cruel comment about how she spoiled the children. A third had set boundaries early and stuck to them, seeing her grandchildren regularly but on her own terms. And she seemed the happiest of all of us. "We don't owe them our entire lives," one woman said. "We already raised our children. This is supposed to be our time." The words resonated in my chest like a bell ringing. Our time. When had I last thought of my time as belonging to me? When had I last made a choice based on what I wanted rather than what someone else needed? I started saying yes to things. Margaret invited me to her watercolor class, and I went. I'd never painted before, never thought I had an artistic bone in my body, but there was something soothing about mixing colors and watching them bloom on paper. I wasn't good at it, but that didn't matter. I enjoyed it, and that was enough. I joined a walking group that met at the park twice a week. I volunteered at the library's literacy program, helping adults learn to read. I reconnected with my sister in Florida and planned a visit for the following month. My days became full again, but full in a different way. Full of choices I made for myself. Full of activities that fed my soul rather than drained it. I was tired at the end of each day, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from living rather than just serving. 3 weeks after I'd walked out of their house, I unblocked their numbers. I wasn't ready to talk to them yet, but I wanted to see if they'd tried to reach me, wanted to know if they'd even noticed my absence beyond the inconvenience it caused them. My phone immediately flooded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls. Dozens of text messages. My heart started pounding as I opened them, and what I read there changed everything once more. The messages painted a picture I could barely believe, even as I read through them one by one with shaking hands. The first few were irritated, demanding to know where I was and why I wasn't answering. Lisa needed me to pick up the children. David couldn't understand why I was being so difficult. But as the days progressed in those texts, the tone shifted. The irritation gave way to frustration, then to something that looked almost like panic. Lisa had missed an important presentation at work because she couldn't find anyone to watch the children. David had to cancel a business trip that would have earned him a significant commission. They'd tried hiring a babysitter from an agency, but Sophie had cried so hard that the woman left after 2 hours, saying she couldn't work with a child who was that distressed. Max had refused to eat anything the new sitter made, had thrown a tantrum so severe they'd had to come home from work early to deal with it. The children keep asking for you, one of David's texts read. Sophie cries for Mama Eve every night. I scrolled further. Lisa had apparently taken time off work to stay with the children, unpaid leave because she'd already used all her vacation days. Her boss had given her a warning about her attendance. David's texts grew more desperate. Mom, please. We need to talk. The kids need you. We didn't mean what we said. But it was the most recent messages, from just 2 days ago, that made my hands go cold. Lisa had quit her job. They couldn't manage the childcare situation. Couldn't afford the professional sitters who charged what they called outrageous rates. Couldn't handle the chaos of trying to work from home while managing 2 young children who wanted their grandmother. She'd given her notice and now she was home full-time. And from the tone of her messages, she was barely holding it together. Everything is falling apart, she'd written. The house is a disaster. I can't keep up with cooking and cleaning and the kids' schedules. Sophie failed a test because I forgot there was one and didn't help her study. Max won't sleep. He cries for you every night. Please, Mom. Please call us back. I set the phone down carefully on the kitchen table and stared at the wall. Part of me felt a terrible satisfaction. A vindication I was almost ashamed to acknowledge. They'd said they didn't need me, that they could figure it out, and now they were drowning. They were learning exactly what I'd been doing for them all those years. All the invisible labor they'd taken for granted. Every meal planned and cooked. Every homework assignment supervised. Every bedtime routine navigated with patience and love. Every sick day managed. Every school pickup remembered. Every emotional need met. It had all been me, and they'd never even noticed until it was gone. But another part of me, the grandmother part that still loved those children with a fierceness that hurt, ached for Sophie and Max. They were innocent in all this. They hadn't called me the free babysitter. They hadn't dismissed my worth. They just wanted their Mama Eve, the person who'd been the most constant presence in their young lives, and they couldn't understand where I'd gone or why. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat with the phone in front of me thinking. My friends from book club would tell me not to give in, not to go running back just because they finally realized they needed me. Margaret would say they had to learn the lesson fully, had to truly understand what they'd lost. And part of me knew they were right. If I went back now, nothing would change. I'd slip back into the same role, the same thankless routine, and they'd go back to taking me for granted until the next time I dared to ask for something. But the children. Sophie's face floated in my mind, her gap-toothed smile, the way she'd curl up next to me on the couch with her favorite book. Max's little hand in mine, his voice asking me to sing the lullaby one more time, just one more. How long could I stay away from them to prove a point to their parents? How much of their childhood would I miss while waiting for David and Lisa to truly understand? I didn't call them back that day, or the next, but I started thinking about what I might say when I did, what boundaries I might set, what kind of relationship I could have with my family that didn't require me to sacrifice myself completely. I wasn't sure what that looked like yet, but I knew I needed to figure it out before I had any contact with them again. The messages kept coming. David called from different numbers, trying to get around the block I'd removed. I'd see his name flash across the screen and my heart would lurch, but I still didn't answer. I needed them to sit in this discomfort a while longer. I needed them to fully feel the weight of what they'd lost, what they'd thrown away so carelessly. Lisa's messages became increasingly frantic. She described their days in painful detail, as if hoping I'd take pity. Max had stopped eating his vegetables entirely. Sophie had gotten in trouble at school for not turning in her homework 3 days in a row. The house was a mess no matter how hard Lisa tried to keep up. David was working longer hours to make up for the lost income from Lisa's job, which meant she was alone with the children even more, drowning in responsibilities she'd never had to fully shoulder before because I'd always been there to catch what fell through the cracks. One message from Lisa particularly struck me. She wrote, "I never understood how much you did. I thought watching kids was just being in the same room with them. I didn't know about all the little things, all the routines, all the ways you kept everything running smoothly. I didn't know how hard this was. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." It was the first real apology I'd received, and it cracked something in my armor. But I still didn't respond. An apology sent in desperation, when they needed something from me, wasn't the same as an apology given freely with no expectation of return. I needed to know they truly understood, not just that they were sorry things had gotten hard for them. My life continued to expand in their absence. I'd started taking a Tai Chi class at the senior center, moving through the slow poses with a group of women who'd become fast friends. My body felt stronger, more alive than it had in years. I wasn't constantly exhausted anymore. I slept through the night without waking at every small sound, my grandmother instincts finally getting a rest. I ate meals that I wanted to eat, not just whatever the children would accept. I watched movies that weren't cartoons. I read books late into the night without worrying about needing to wake up early the next morning. But I also felt the absence like a physical ache. I'd see a toy in a store window that Max would love and reach for my phone to text David before remembering. I'd bake cookies on a Sunday afternoon and realize I'd automatically made Sophie's favorite kind, chocolate chip with extra chips, and there was no one to give them to. I'd hear a song that reminded me of the lullabies I used to sing and feel tears prick my eyes unexpectedly. Love doesn't just disappear because someone hurts you. That's what made all of this so complicated, so painful. I still loved them. I still loved my son, despite his weakness in that moment when he should have defended me. I still loved my daughter-in-law, even though her words had cut so deep. And I desperately loved those grandchildren, loved them enough that staying away from them was the hardest thing I'd ever done. For weeks after I'd walked out of their house, Margaret convinced me to go with her to a grief support group at the community center. I protested that no one had died, but she gave me a knowing look and said grief came in many forms. The loss of a relationship, the loss of a role you'd built your identity around, the loss of the future you'd imagined. All of these were worth grieving. She was right. Sitting in that circle of strangers who understood loss, I finally let myself mourn. I mourned the grandmother relationship I'd thought I had, the one where I was cherished and valued. I mourned the daughter-in-law relationship I'd hoped to build with Lisa, one of mutual respect and appreciation. I mourned the version of my son I'd thought I'd raised, the one who would never stand by while someone diminished his mother. And I mourned the time I'd lost, all those years I'd poured into them while neglecting myself, thinking that was what love required. But in that morning, something else began to grow. A determination. A clarity. I'd spent my whole life putting others first. My husband when he was alive, then David, then the grandchildren. I'd never asked what I wanted, what I needed, what would fill my own cup instead of constantly pouring from it until it was empty. Now at 83 years old, I was finally asking those questions. And I was finally ready to put myself first, even if it meant everything had to change. When I got home that evening, there was a car in my driveway, David's car. And standing on my porch, looking exhausted and desperate and older than I'd ever seen him look, was my son. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, dark circles shadowing his eyes. For a moment, seeing him there on my porch looking so broken, I was transported back 30 years to when he was a teenager who'd come home devastated after his first heartbreak. My instinct was to rush forward, to comfort him, to make everything better the way mothers do. But I stopped myself at the bottom of the porch steps and just looked at him, waiting. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking on that single word. "Please. We need to talk." I noticed he said we, not I. Even now, in this moment that should have been about him apologizing to me, he was thinking about their collective need. I climbed the steps slowly, my arthritis making my knees protest, and unlocked my door. I didn't invite him in right away. I stood in the doorway and asked him how he found out I was home, since I could have been at Tai Chi or book club or any number of places I went now. He looked confused by the question, as if the idea that I had a life and schedule of my own had never occurred to him. "I've been driving by every evening for a week," he admitted, "waiting to see your car. A week of surveillance. A week of checking on me like I was a package he'd been expecting. Not a week of respecting my space or my silence, but a week of waiting for the right moment to corner me." I felt that cold anger rise again, the kind that made my voice steady and calm even when everything inside me was trembling. I stepped inside and left the door open behind me. He followed. We stood in my living room, this space that used to feel too small and now felt too empty, and I waited for him to speak first. He'd come to my home uninvited. He'd waited on my porch like a stranger. The burden of explanation belonged to him. "Mom, everything's falling apart," he began, and then the words poured out of him in a rush. Lisa had quit her job and was miserable at home. The children were struggling in school. Sophie had started having nightmares. Max refused to eat anything but chicken nuggets and was losing weight. They'd tried 3 different babysitters and none had lasted more than a few days. The house was chaos. Their marriage was strained. Lisa cried every night. He felt like he was failing at everything. As a father, as a husband, as a provider. I listened to all of it without interrupting. I watched my son, this man I'd raised alone through grief and financial struggle and teenage rebellion, and I felt a complicated mix of love and disappointment. He was telling me about their suffering, their struggles, their needs. He still hadn't apologized. He still hadn't acknowledged what they'd said to me, how they'd made me feel, what they'd reduced me to in that kitchen 5 weeks ago. When he finally ran out of words, breathing hard like he'd been running a race, I asked him a simple question. "Why are you here, David?" He looked at me like I'd asked something absurd. "To ask you to come back," he said. "The kids need you. We need you. Please, Mom." I walked slowly to my chair by the window and sat down, gesturing for him to take the couch. He perched on the edge of it, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees. I took my time, gathering my thoughts, finding the right words for what needed to be said. "Do you remember what Lisa said to me?" I asked quietly. "Do you remember what you said?" He had the decency to look ashamed. His eyes dropped to the floor. "We were stressed," he mumbled. "We didn't mean it. Things were hard at work and..." I held up my hand to stop him. "Yes or no, David? Do you remember the words?" He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "She called you the free babysitter," he whispered. "And I said we didn't need you anymore." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush us both. I could see him struggling with it, wanting to fill it with explanations and excuses, but I let it stretch until he had no choice but to sit with the weight of those words the way I'd been sitting with them for 5 weeks. "I raised you better than that," I finally said. "Your father and I, we taught you that family means something. That the people who love you and sacrifice for you deserve respect and gratitude, not dismissal. I was there every single day for your children. I canceled my own plans. I gave up my own life. I never asked you for money. I never asked you for anything except one small break, one moment to catch my breath, and you both told me I was just the free help." "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, and now there were tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry. We didn't realize." "What didn't you realize?" I interrupted. "That I was a person with feelings? That I might get tired or need rest. That watching 2 young children every day is exhausting work that people get paid good money to do? What exactly didn't you realize, David?" He was crying now, really crying, in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "All of it," he said. "We didn't realize any of it. We thought you loved doing it. We thought you wanted to be there all the time. We didn't think about what you were giving up or how hard it was. We just thought you'd always be there. Because I always had been. That was the problem, wasn't it? I'd trained them to expect my constant availability, my endless sacrifice. I'd never set a single boundary, never said no to a single request, never asked them to consider my needs. And so they'd stopped considering them at all. I'd made myself so reliably selfless that they'd forgotten I had a self to consider. "I love Sophie and Max more than I can put into words," I told him. "Being their grandmother has been one of the greatest joys of my life. But joy shouldn't require me to disappear. Love shouldn't mean I have no value beyond what I can do for others." "You have value," he said desperately. "You're my mother. You're their grandmother. You mean everything to us. Then why did it take losing me for you to realize that?" I asked. "Why did Lisa have to quit her job and struggle for weeks before any of you understood what I was doing every single day? Why did I have to vanish before you saw me?" He had no answer for that. We sat in silence again, and I could see him processing, really processing, maybe for the first time. I could see the moment it truly hit him. The scope of what they'd taken for granted. His face crumpled with the realization, and he put his head in his hands. "What can I do?" he asked through his tears. "How can I fix this? Just tell me what you need and I'll do it." But that was still the wrong question. It wasn't about what I needed from him. It was about what I needed for myself, and whether I could have a relationship with them that honored that. I'd spent weeks building a life that belonged to me, filling my days with things that fed my soul instead of depleted it. Could I let them back in without losing that? Could we find a balance that didn't require me to sacrifice everything? I don't know if you can fix this, I told him honestly. I don't know if things can go back to how they were. And truthfully, I don't want them to. I don't want to be the free babysitter anymore, David. I don't want to give up my entire life to make yours easier. I don't want you to, he said quickly. We'll figure something else out. We'll hire help. We'll make changes. Just please don't shut us out completely. The kids are heartbroken. Sophie made you a card every single day for 2 weeks. Max sleeps with the stuffed bear you gave him, and asks me every morning if today is the day Mama Eve comes back. My heart twisted painfully at that image. Those babies. Those sweet, innocent children who were caught in the middle of this mess their parents had created. I'd stayed away from them to prove a point, to force David and Lisa to understand, but the children were the ones suffering most. They didn't understand adult pride or boundary setting, or the complex dynamics of family relationships. They just knew that the person they loved, the person who'd been there every day of their lives, had suddenly disappeared. I want to see them, I heard myself say, but not at your house, not in that role. They can come here for a visit. A real visit, where we spend time together because we want to, not because you need a babysitter. Okay, David said immediately. Yes. When? I thought about my calendar, about the activities I'd scheduled, the commitments I'd made to myself and my new friends. Saturday afternoon, I said. For 2 hours. You and Lisa will stay too. We'll have tea and cookies, and we'll talk like a family, not like an employer and an employee. He nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face. But I held up my hand again. This doesn't fix everything, I told him. This is just a start. You and Lisa need to understand that my time is my own now. I'll see the children when I can, when I choose to, but I won't be your daily childcare anymore. That chapter is closed. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes everything feel possible. I spent the morning preparing for their visit the way I used to prepare for holidays. Carefully, thoughtfully, but this time with a different intention. I wasn't trying to prove anything or earn anyone's approval. I was simply making space for people I loved while maintaining the boundaries I'd built. I baked cookies, Sophie's favorite chocolate chip kind, but I didn't make myself exhausted doing it. I made 1 batch, not 3. I set the table with my good china, the set I'd inherited from my mother that I'd almost never used because it seemed too fancy for every day, and I was always too tired for special occasions. I put fresh flowers in a vase, yellow chrysanthemums from my garden. I made sure my house looked welcoming, but not like I'd worked myself to the bone preparing for them. When they arrived at 2 o'clock exactly, I watched from my window as they got out of the car. David lifted Max out of his booster seat while Lisa helped Sophie with her coat. The children looked smaller somehow, or perhaps I'd just forgotten how little they really were in the 5 weeks I'd been away. Sophie was holding something clutched tightly to her chest. Lisa's face looked drawn and tired, older than her 36 years. David kept glancing nervously at my front door. I opened it before they could knock. Sophie's eyes went wide when she saw me, and for a moment she just stood there frozen on the porch. Then she burst into tears and ran forward, throwing herself at my legs with such force I had to grip the doorframe to stay steady. Mama Eve, she sobbed into my skirt. Mama Eve, you came back. I knelt down slowly, ignoring the protest in my knees, and wrapped my arms around her. Max joined us a second later, his little arms going around my neck, his face buried in my shoulder. I held them both and felt tears slide down my own cheeks. This was what I'd missed most, this uncomplicated love. This pure need that had nothing to do with convenience or free labor, and everything to do with the bond we'd built through thousands of small moments. I missed you so much, Sophie whispered. Why did you go away? Over their heads, I met Lisa's eyes. She was crying too, silently, her hand over her mouth. David stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, and he looked gutted. Good, part of me thought. Let them see this. Let them understand what they almost destroyed. I didn't go away, sweetheart, I told Sophie, pulling back to look at her tear-streaked face. I'm right here. I've always been right here in my house. But sometimes grown-ups need to have important conversations, and sometimes that means taking a little break from our regular routine. Are you mad at Mommy and Daddy? Max asked, his voice small and worried. I considered lying, softening it, but decided these children deserved honesty. A little bit, I admitted. But we're working on it. The important thing is that I love you both very much, and that never changed, not even for 1 second. I stood up slowly, my knees reminding me of my age, and gestured everyone inside. Sophie was still clutching the papers to her chest. She held them out to me shyly. I made these for you, she said. Daddy said I couldn't give them to you because you needed space, but I made them anyway. There were 14 cards, one for each day she'd made them before apparently giving up. They were beautiful in the way children's art is beautiful, messy and earnest and full of love. Crayon drawings of the two of us holding hands, of hearts and flowers, of our family. I'm sorry, Mama Eve. I love you, Mama Eve. Please come back. The words were spelled wrong and the letters went uphill, but each card pierced my heart. These are the most wonderful cards I've ever received, I told her, and I meant it. I'm going to put them up on my refrigerator where I can see them every day. We moved into the living room and I served tea for the adults and milk for the children, with the cookies I'd made. The children settled on the floor with their snacks, and for a few minutes we all just existed together in careful silence. Lisa was the first to speak. I owe you an apology, she said, her voice shaking. A real one, not just the ones I sent in text messages when I was desperate. What I said to you was cruel and wrong and completely unfair. You've given us years of your time and love. And I repaid that by reducing you to a service, by making you feel disposable. I'm ashamed of myself. I looked at her carefully. She'd lost weight, I noticed. Her clothes hung a bit loose, and there were new lines around her eyes. These weeks had aged her. I'm listening, I said simply. I took you for granted, she continued. Completely for granted. I thought childcare was easy because you made it look easy. I thought anyone could do what you did. And then when you were gone, I realized that you weren't just watching them. You were raising them. You knew their rhythms and their needs and their fears. You knew how to calm Max when he had nightmares, and how to help Sophie with her math homework. You knew which snacks they'd eat and which stories they loved and 1,000 other things I'd never even noticed because I was too busy assuming it was simple. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I quit my job, and I thought I'd just step into your role, and everything would be fine. But I was terrible at it. I'm still terrible at it. The kids missed you every single day. They cried for you. And I realized that I'd been treating you like hired help when you were actually the primary caregiver in their lives, the most stable and loving presence they had. And instead of being grateful, I was dismissive and rude. David reached over and took my hand. I failed you too, Mom, he said. I should have stood up for you that night. I should have told Lisa she was wrong, that you weren't the free babysitter, that you were my mother who'd sacrificed everything for me my whole life, and was now doing the same for my children. But I didn't. I just sat there and agreed with her because it was easier than confronting the truth, that we were using you. We were taking advantage of your love. The words I'd needed to hear 5 weeks ago were finally being said, but they felt different now. Less like victory and more like sadness. I was glad they understood, but I mourned the fact that it had taken so much pain to get here. I accept your apologies, I said carefully, and I appreciate that you've learned something from this. But I need you to understand that I meant what I told David. I can't go back to the way things were. I won't. We don't want you to, Lisa said quickly. We've enrolled the kids in an after-school program 3 days a week. I'm looking for part-time work, something with flexible hours. We're figuring out how to actually be full-time parents to our children instead of outsourcing that job to you. We should have been doing that all along. I nodded slowly. That's good, I said. That's what you should be doing. But I'd still like to be part of their lives. I'd like to see them regularly, spend time with them, be their grandmother. Just not their caretaker. What does that look like? David asked. Tell us what would work for you. I thought about the life I'd built in the past 5 weeks, the activities and friendships and quiet moments that had filled my days with meaning. I thought about the exhaustion I no longer felt, the resentment that had lifted. I thought about what I could give without depleting myself. I can do 1 afternoon a week, I said. Saturday or Sunday, whichever works better. We can do something fun together. Go to the park, bake cookies here, read books. Quality time, not duty. And maybe one evening a month, you and Lisa can have a date night and I'll watch them. But you have to ask me in advance, not last minute. You have to respect my schedule the way I respect yours. That's more than fair, David said. That's more than we deserve. And if I'm sick or tired or have other plans, I need to be able to say no without guilt, I continued. I need you to find backup options, not rely on me as your only option. I need you to understand that I'm 83 years old. And while I'm healthy now, I won't always be. You need to build a system that doesn't collapse without me. We will, Lisa promised. We are. Sophie climbed into my lap, careful with the teacup on the side table. Mama Eve, she said seriously, are you going to be our grandma again? I was always your grandma, sweetheart, I told her, kissing the top of her head. I never stopped. I just needed to remember that I'm also Evelyn, a person with my own life. And sometimes Evelyn needs to do Evelyn things. She seemed to consider this. Like your book club? She asked. I blinked in surprise. How did you know about my book club? Daddy said you have lots of friends now and do lots of fun things, she said. He said you're very busy being happy. The months that followed our reconciliation were not without challenges. There were moments when Lisa would text me with that old familiar urgency, asking if I could possibly watch the children because something had come up, and I'd feel that old familiar pull to say yes immediately. But I'd learn to pause, to check my calendar, to consider what I'd be giving up, to remember that my time had value even when I wasn't spending it on anyone else. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said no. And slowly, painfully, they learned to accept both answers with grace. The children adapted better than I'd expected. Our Saturday afternoons together became something we all looked forward to. I'd pick them up at noon and we'd have adventures. The children's museum, the botanical gardens, the library for story time. Or sometimes we'd just stay at my house and bake or do puzzles or work in the garden. Max learned to help me plant bulbs for spring flowers. Sophie and I started a tradition of reading chapter books together, one chapter each visit, stretched over weeks and months. We were working our way through the Chronicles of Narnia, and she'd named the stray cat that had started visiting my porch Mr. Tumnus. These moments were sweeter somehow than all those daily hours had been. When you see someone every day, you stop really seeing them. But when our time together became precious and limited, we savored it. I was present with them in a way I hadn't been before. Not distracted by laundry or dinner preparations or the exhaustion of keeping up with their endless energy all day long. I could just be their grandmother, loving them wholly for the few hours we had together. David and Lisa kept their promises. They hired a college student to pick the children up from school 3 days a week and stay with them until one parent got home. They adjusted their work schedules so at least one of them could be home by 5. Lisa found a part-time remote position in marketing that paid less than her old job, but gave her the flexibility she needed. Their marriage, which had been strained to breaking, slowly began to heal as they learned to work together as partners rather than two people desperately trying to keep their heads above water. One evening about 4 months after our confrontation, Lisa came to my house alone. She called first, asking if she could visit, and I heard something in her voice that made me say yes even though it was a Tuesday and Tuesdays were my watercolor class. She arrived with a bottle of wine and a nervous smile. We sat in my living room, the same room where so many hard conversations had happened, and she poured us each a glass. I need to tell you something, she said. I've been going to therapy, just me on my own, and I've been working through a lot of things about my childhood, about my relationship with my own mother, about why I treated you the way I did. I waited, listening. Her mother had been cold and critical, she told me. Nothing Lisa did was ever good enough. When she'd had Sophie, her mother had shown minimal interest, offering criticism instead of help. So when I showed up eager and available and loving, Lisa had seen it as weakness rather than gift. She'd unconsciously replicated the dynamic she'd grown up with, treating caregiving as something that had no value because that's what she'd been taught. I'm not making excuses, she said quickly. What I did was wrong regardless of why I did it. But I wanted you to understand that when I diminished what you did, I was diminishing what I'd never received myself. I didn't know how to value it because I'd never been valued that way. I felt something shift in my chest. I'd spent so much time angry at Lisa, hurt by her words, but I'd never considered what wounds she might have been carrying. We're all products of how we were raised. And sometimes we hurt people not out of malice but out of learned patterns we don't even recognize. Thank you for telling me that, I said. And I'm glad you're doing that work for yourself. She set down her wine glass and looked at me with tears in her eyes. I want you to know that I see you now, she said. Really see you. Not as the person who makes my life easier or solves my problems, but as Evelyn. As a woman who has her own dreams and interests and needs. You're in a book club and you take Tai Chi and you're learning to paint. You have friends and hobbies and a life. And you should have had all of that all along. I'm sorry I took so many years from you. You can't give them back, I said gently. And I won't lie and say it doesn't hurt to think about all the things I missed while I was so focused on being what you needed. But I'm choosing not to be bitter about it. I'm choosing to make the most of whatever time I have left. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to make something clear, she said. When we see you with Sophie and Max now, the way they light up, the special bond you have with them, that's not despite the boundaries you set. It's because of them. They get the best version of you now. The grandmother who's rested and happy and present. Before, they were getting someone who was exhausted and taken for granted. This is better for everyone. I hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. The grandmother I was now, the one who showed up on Saturdays full of energy and joy, was a better grandmother than the one who'd been there every day running on empty. Quality had replaced quantity, and somehow we'd all gained from it. My book club friends threw me a birthday party in March, when I turned 84. Margaret had decorated the community room at the library with streamers and balloons. And there were 20 women there, all of them friends I'd made in the past 6 months. Women who knew me as Evelyn, not as someone's mother or grandmother. Women who valued my opinions on books and politics and life. Women who'd built lives of meaning after their children were grown, who'd learned that being useful wasn't the same as being valuable. David, Lisa, and the children came too. I told them they didn't need to, that this was my separate life, but they'd insisted. I watched Lisa chatting easily with Margaret, laughing at something she said. I watched David help Max with a piece of cake. I watched Sophie sitting with one of my Tai Chi friends, showing her the latest chapter book we were reading together. My two worlds had merged, and instead of one consuming the other, they coexisted peacefully. Sophie made a speech, standing on a chair even though she didn't need to at 7 years old. Her voice clear and confident. Our Mama Eve is the best grandma in the world, she announced. She teaches us about flowers and reads us stories and makes the best cookies. And she also does lots of other important things that have nothing to do with us, which Mommy says is very good and healthy. The room erupted in laughter and applause. Lisa caught my eye from across the room and smiled. A real smile with no guilt or desperation behind it. I smiled back, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete. That night, after everyone had gone and I was alone in my house with the leftover cake and the cards people had given me, I sat in my chair by the window and reflected on the past 7 months. The betrayal in the kitchen felt like a lifetime ago. That version of me, the one who'd said yes to everything and asked for nothing, felt like a different person entirely. I thought about all the women I'd met who'd had similar stories. The grandmothers who'd given up everything only to be cast aside. The mothers who'd sacrificed so much they'd forgotten who they were. The wives who'd built their entire identities around being needed. We were everywhere, invisible in our service until we stopped providing it. But I also thought about the women who'd set boundaries early, who'd maintained their own lives while still being present for family. The ones who'd never lost themselves in the first place. I wished I'd been one of them. I wished I'd learned these lessons 30 years ago instead of at 83. But regret was a waste of the time I had left. I pulled out my journal, the one my therapist had suggested I start keeping. Yes, I was in therapy too now. At 84. Learning about boundaries and self-worth and healthy relationships. Better late than never, my therapist always said. I wrote. Today I am grateful for the pain that taught me my worth. I am grateful for the betrayal that freed me. I am grateful for the silence that helped me hear my own voice again. I am grateful for my grandchildren, for my son. Even for my daughter-in-law who hurt me but then did the work to understand why. But most of all, I am grateful for myself, for the woman I've become, for the life I'm building, for the years I still have to live on my own terms. The next Saturday, Sophie asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. The question made me laugh, but then I thought about it seriously. I want to be exactly who I am right now, I told her. A woman who knows she's valuable just for being herself, not for what she can do for others. Sophie considered this with the gravity only a 7-year-old can manage. That's good, Mama Eve, she said finally. Because you're the best you I know. And in that moment, sitting in my garden with dirt under my fingernails and my granddaughter beside me and a whole afternoon of nothing but our choosing stretching ahead, I believed her.